Hello. Before we start, I'm going to say apologies. 8 second. There'll be an 8 second gap after this, and I can't get rid of it. Oh, I get so annoyed. Sometimes it comes out perfectly. But this is a really fascinating one. Although it says how to end homelessness, the solution is so easy. But when I get with Mike, he knows so much. I will be putting the link for his YouTube channel on the documentary. It's always interesting. So, here we go. Hello, welcome to the guest show. We have returned Mike Hyden of HBP. Here, say what it stands for. I always forget. An amazing man. And what happened was I saw something that Mike put on his. Mike also does a YouTube channel. Normally Thursdays, it's advice for people about housing law. And I've been to some of them, they're very interesting. Some of the topics I like to cover, but I don't know. I have now got somebody who's interested in housing law, but maybe not that side of it. So what happened was I saw on his channel, how do you end homelessness? Everybody wants to know that answer, I'm sure. I think we all have theories, and I respect Mike's theories more than most. So, first of all, thank you for coming, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me in. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so tell me, how are we going to end homelessness?
Yeah, well, so it's a little bit clickbaity in one sense because I'm looking at a narrow type of homelessness, which is rough sleeping, and particularly looking at people with recourse to public funds. For reasons I'll explain in a little bit. So obviously, when people think of homelessness, they'll think about someone who's rough sleeping. That's kind of the most, kind of stereotypical type of it. However, there's maybe hundreds of thousands of people who are homeless legally across the country. You might argue that there's over a million. It just depends how you define it, because the legal definition will include people who are at risk of domestic abuse and who don't necessarily have to actually have fled yet, but they're at risk where they are, and also people who just genuinely can't afford their rent or their other housing costs. So those groups would be legally homeless as well. So that's kind of the broad definition from a legal point of view. But yeah, I mean, kind of just honing in on this kind of real issue of sleeping rough. For a long time, I started working in the sector 20 years ago. But when I started working in the sector, I thought homelessness was all about, people with mental health issues and drug and alcohol issues that couldn't maintain their accommodation without some nice support worker somewhere helping them out. And over the years, I've been proved wrong about that by loads and loads of people who were supposed to be unhousable. And once they were properly treated by the local council, they were housed through the statutory framework that has existed for years. They basically never became homeless again. They didn't need any support. And so even those individuals who, as I say, on paper were unhousable, so complex mental health issues, complex substance use issues, histories of arson, that sort of thing, which makes it quite difficult on paper to get someone housed. If they're treated legally and they're provided with suitable accommodation according to the law, then, as I say, you'd be surprised by who doesn't come back round. So we've been raising this in our local council in Bedford. That's where most of my frontline work's been, and basically just made the point that in Bedford, the highest number of rough sleepers they recorded was 76 back in 2017, and around that period, they also basically made a decision to try and follow the law as best they could when it comes to taking homeless applications when they should, correctly assessing priority need when they should, like vulnerability. And what we've seen is that rough sleeper numbers have gone down to nearly zero, and the number of single people in temporary accommodation has gone up by about 4,000%. And that's partly because myself and John Allen from Just Us, a little charity we set up 10 years ago, we just held the council to account on it. So just two of us in our part-time, spare time, complaining when the council broke the law, getting people compensation, getting people housed. And so after a few years of doing it, we basically submitted a report to the MP and the mayor and whatnot. And then now, I'm saying this, this is, they haven't openly acknowledged this for many years, but in the recent housing committee this year, they acknowledged that it was basically because of what we were doing that kind of led them to politically kind of up their game. Now, alongside all this stuff, there's been on this kind of rough sleeper initiative stuff, and in my opinion, that's kind of I don't know. I'm going to just say I think it's a bit of a waste of time, really, because it often, often results in kind of very short-sighted initiatives that don't result in anyone actually getting housed. So there'd be kind of, Bedford, the Rough Sleeper Initiative involves having 20 or so camp beds in some old parking shop floor place, and that's not ending homelessness. It might be keeping people off the streets for a night, but it's not ending homelessness. So basically, long story short, I kind of just got into the government statistics. So if you go on if you just Google homelessness live tables, you'll get the kind of most recent statistics. There are loads on there, really interesting stuff for every local authority that actually bothers to return stats, because not all of them do all the time, which makes it a little bit difficult. But basically, what I isolated was the number of single people in TA, which is actually recorded implicitly. It's not explicit, but you can kind of do a bit of maths to get it. And the number of people with recourse to public funds who are estimated to sleep rough. And in one sense, because housing law really only helps people who have recourse, that's kind of why I bothered isolating those two numbers. And what you get is, when you kind of look at it all together and you stick it on some graphs, what you get is a very beautiful correlation between the number of single people in TA and the number of people sleeping rough. Obviously, if this is a video podcast, I'll show you some slides here at this point. But it doesn't look very remarkable until you multiply the number of people sleeping rough by 8, and you then get this very close, like sort of symmetry between the numbers going up, numbers going up versus numbers going down, depending how you look at it. And so what these numbers suggest to me is that if you have, let's say you've got 20 rough sleepers, if you've got you're estimating 20 rough sleepers in your annual count, as problematic as that methodology is, if you aim to get 8 times that number, so 20 people, if you aim to get 160 people into temporary accommodation, you'll find that the numbers will drop to close to 0. And it's not necessarily that. So there's two things happening. One is that you're housing the people who are already rough sleeping, but it's also, you're basically making the law how it was designed to work, in terms of it being a preventative issue, so a preventative measure to kind of stop people actually falling through the cracks and ending up rough sleeping. So if you do it consistently for a long period of time, you'll find that, that basically numbers will really dry up in terms of people sleeping rough. And the way you kind of do this stuff, and I guess the beauty of this is that you don't have to wait for the say so from some central government body, or MHC or G that now is, or whatever, kind of deciding that they're going to try and do something. You can just take the bull by the horns and just start challenging your council, and calling them out when they're breaking the law, because they are breaking the law. Most councils break the law many times a day. And that's, if you don't believe me on that, go and check out the local government ombudsman's decisions. You see just how many of them are, and how little accountability there is in most of the country. So if you think of the legal aid deserts around, you've got vast swathes of the country that don't have any, legal aid funded services at all for housing issues. You start to realise that actually, some of those leafy suburb areas are kind of the worst offenders in many cases. They just don't get caught. So,
that's a question. Yeah. I got a couple of questions really.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
First of all, I'm shocked that you said rough sleep in Bedford is almost 0. And could this be because, look, we look at there is something, ladies and gentlemen, called a street count, where people go out, but they don't count the whole area. I know somebody, we both know somebody, I think Claire, who we know, said she was in the street count. She went to a road and they said, we're not going up that road. And she ended up with another 50 people up there. So would you say the figures in Bedford are massaged, or are they realistic?
So historically, I mean, it's an excellent point. So historically, they certainly have been. They're so politicized, it's unbelievable. So I coordinated the rough sleeper count back in 2008, when Bedford had the second highest number of rough sleepers in the country, behind Westminster. And as you said, it wasn't because there actually was the second highest number. It was just because we actually bothered to go looking for them. So and that kind of caused some ripples back then. I remember some real kind of issues kind of caused with the politicians at that point. And there's also been times where I believe that the council was over-egged as numbers, because they know the higher numbers get higher amounts of funding. So it does go both ways. But I guess, and so when you actually look at the individual local authorities using my stats, there's it kind of, some areas kind of really show a very strong correlation, like the national picture. Other ones, there's kind of anomaly. So Hull, for example, kind of you look at Hull's figures and it kind of, it just doesn't quite follow the pattern. But then when I speak to people from Hull, apparently there was kind of a very large supported accommodation unit that was just basically shut down, and that kind of led to obviously an increase in people rough sleeping, which wasn't obvious without kind of having that local knowledge. So yeah, but I mean Bedford, I would say that they're pretty accurate now in terms of the figures. I don't know for sure. I'm sure there's a little bit of inaccuracy here and there, but as a trend, I mean, certainly, when we posted that number of 76 people sleeping rough back in 2017, it was, there was a lot of visible people around, and that is certainly much less of an issue now. I trust the local providers that do the estimate to an extent. They're also under pressure to kind of provide magic numbers every so often, but I would say that they're pretty accurate. So yeah, I think it the when you compare these two figures across the country, the number of single people in TA is pretty robust, because local authorities will definitely be recording that, because they will definitely be paying for it. Whereas rough sleeper numbers do, they certainly are subject to that political kind of stuff. However, when you average it all together across the whole of England, the correlation is just really striking. So I think on average, if you average out all those kind of different areas, kind of over-egging it and underestimating it, I think it kind of levels out to a very clear correlation.
So now my next point, you mentioned, now they are talking, and it's only talk, several of their plans, as we both said before, they're not doing anything. They haven't announced what they're going to do about homelessness. And as you said before, to me, when I got off I'm a rough sleeper. When I got off the street, you said to me, homelessness, it's rough sleeping, that's it. But then I discovered it's TA as well. I was shocked when hostels were in that list, because to me, when I was in the hostel, I wasn't homeless anymore. And the other areas, squatting and others. They are talking about having a housing ombudsman. And I'm hoping this housing ombudsman has teeth. I'm going to put an idea to you. It only occurred to me when you were talking. We have a rough sleeping minister, which I'm going to try. I'm hoping to get on. I doubt it, but I'll try, because I'm not the BBC and they do publicity. Should there be a rough sleeping ombudsman?
I guess the question would be, what do they do? I mean, the local government ombudsman, they're the ones who keep an eye on the council when they gatekeep. The courts, in theory, keep an eye on councils when they tell someone's not, tell someone that they're not vulnerable when they clearly are. And those are the two kind of things which I guess connect into this statutory provision around the Housing Act and the route out of homelessness. It was designed to be the route one out of homelessness. Never mind the whole kind of staircase model hostel system. This was supposed to be. I mean, it's not quite housing first in the sense that you don't get degree of choice, and you will get moved around a little bit from temporary accommodation depending on which council you go to. Some councils are great, but some others certainly aren't. But there is that kind of immediacy. So, if you approach your local authority and you're off sleeping, the chances are they will owe you a duty immediately that night to provide suitable accommodation. The question is does the council actually bother following the law? Because one of the weaknesses of the local government ombudsman is that the compensation they can recommend is less than what it would cost to actually house the person in the first place. So local authorities, essentially, they know that they are better off gatekeeping people, leaving people on the streets, because in the very unlikely event that they actually get caught doing it, they'll still only have to pay like less than the amount they'd had to pay anyway on temporary accommodation. So I mean, not that this is, I've heard this any discussions on this, but if you were to maybe multiply those amounts by 10, you might start reaching a figure which actually motivates the council to follow the law a bit more. I mean, certainly some of the compensation payouts that I've seen in recent decisions are sort of 13k, 14k, where someone's been placed in unsuitable temporary accommodation. So, that's probably more of a figure that's likely to catch a council's attention. But certainly the sort of typical figure for someone rough sleeping who's unlawfully denied housing is going to be in the order of maybe £1,000 or £2,000, maybe 4,000, 5,000 at a push. So it's kind of, it's not, most councils will just, there's kind of, they just don't really care.
I think there's several areas anti-building is one of my hot subjects. We're not going to talk about that today, but I want to talk about how homeless people are treated.
Yeah, I mean, so when I worked at Just Us, Just Us was a little charity me and John Allen set up. John still works there. I'm just doing this training stuff with HBP now. But so when we got someone housed, and we almost got everyone housed through the homeless application route just by challenging the council. robustly, so complaining to the chief exec, raising questions in the local housing committee, all things which are legitimate things that members of the public should be doing anyway. And when we got someone housed, we basically go for coffee with them and sit down and talk about their experiences. And it was remarkable how often they would say that the worst thing about being homeless was actually how they were treated by the local authority, in terms of just the rudeness, the bullying kind of housing officers, the kind of very clear injustice of it. Because obviously, if you're homeless, there's no reason why you would understand the intricacies of housing law. But people, because it's kind of fairly common sense bit of law, people realise they're getting screwed over. They just can't tell you which section it is that the council's broken. So I think that kind of, and so Professor Luke Clements, he kind of writes the social care, the adult social care textbook on the industry standard, legal action group textbook. He talks about this idea of systems generated trauma, and he talks about kind of case, and just across this welfare system. So not just homelessness, but children being removed into care, kind of learning kind of disabilities, that sort of thing, where they're having to deal with services. And he would just kind of have kind of have this trend of people in that situation just being dealt with so badly, so consistently, that they have to kind of it's basically, it's only the kind of the most capable and the most persistent ones, the ones who are effectively the least vulnerable. They're really the only ones who can push through the system, and they do that by stamping their feet, kind of expecting to be treated according to their rights, involving politicians, basically an understanding that that's important. Whereas I think most people who are homeless, if you say to them, well, have you been to your local MP, or have you been to your local councillor, they'll look at you funny, like, well, what on earth are they going to do? But actually, those people can be very helpful if they're decent, and many of them are. I mean, particularly councillors. So yes, I think that kind of, that idea of actually trying to get help becomes traumatic in itself is something which seems to be a pretty widespread effect. And housing officers often kind of, housing officers often whinge on about how they're the victims and how they have a really difficult job, but they're breaking the law every day. They know they're breaking the law every day, and they just don't seem to be able to see that the people they're unlawfully denying housing have got it worse than they have. So you kind of, I'm just kind of amazed by how housing officers kind of see the situation. Kind of, they don't see they have any agency in it. They're just like, oh, this is the way it is. We haven't got any houses. Not one of them would ever think, or very few of them, let's say. I have met a couple of decent ones, but who actually would say, well, do you know what? My boss is telling me to break the law. I'm going to do something about that. I'm going to, whatever, whistleblower. I'm going to, kind of, you potentially go on strike. There are other things. I know there's a group of Scottish housing officers who went on strike a couple of years ago, but these are things which should just be kind of the go-to option. And yet housing officers, they say they care, but if they're not willing to go on strike, if they're not willing to kind of take those kind of measures, then I have to ask how much do they care really? I mean, as I say, they seem to have a very kind of funny view of the world, in my opinion, in my experience.
I think, so until recently, I would always say I'm the person who, if something's wrong, I'll stand up for it. You might remember 3 years ago, I ended up in a hospital. I disappeared. That's my way. That's my solution for anything I get bad. I don't talk to anybody. I remember I went to the hospital, had the operation, put in a care place. Where I was living wouldn't take me back, and now that place has been closed down. And I think that's a funding. I'm actually going to be in the area tomorrow. I'm going to check. But I remember the social worker coming in, who was my worker, saying this is a small place. It was okay. It was modern, but it was small, yes. And I spoke about moving on. Next minute, they sent me to one place who wanted me to pay for loads of stuff, which I didn't have the money for. And the council weren't going to help me. And then in November, I got an eviction notice, which was dated the 18th of November. I had to be out on the 25th. Now, Ross, who told me that's illegal, and I knew that afterwards. I didn't know what to do. And that's the thing. It's, thank God there are places like you where they can get some sort of referral. My friend Nicola, that public support, I mentioned about somebody else came to me about housing. Benefits I could advocate for somebody. I know nothing about housing, nothing about housing law. But she told me about an agency somewhere that does do legal advice to people. But also the other thing is, and I remember in the hostel, I never understood it. Now I understand it. I get people in my hostel come to me. Now I was editing the magazine. I was good with computers. I showed people I used. That was it. And I get people come to me and say, "Oh, that worker is treating me bad." And I said, "Why didn't you complain about it?" Because I truly believe the right to complain. No, I can't. And I'm sure you've come across cases where people have only ended up at their last resort. Yeah. So
I mean, people certainly get treated worse if they make a complaint. So it has to be done carefully and kind of a little bit strategically. So so when I worked at Bedford Borough Council, I've probably talked about this before, but because I ended up whistleblowing there because it was so disgusting. But they would boast about gatekeeping. They boast about unlawfully denying people housing. They would if someone made a decent complaint, they basically say, okay, well, we're better for the law, but we're going to find the shittest place we can possibly put them, just kind of that revenge kind of thing. And so I guess something I say often is that I can't think of a setting in this country where there is a greater power imbalance between a homeless officer or a housing officer and a homeless person, because social workers have a lot of power, police have a lot of power. But social worker, if they're going to remove your kids from you, they've got to go through court. They've got to go get past the judge. There's got a lot of kind of checks and balances they've got to satisfy. Whereas housing officers, they'll just they just tell people, no, there's nothing. You're not in priority need. There's nothing we need to do, and they get away with it most of the time. There's no professional body of housing officers. There's no training required. There's very little, if any, kind of negative consequences if a housing officer gets caught breaking the law. They tend to close ranks very quickly. So if you kind of think of that sort of the very worst of the post office investigation team, or the very worst kind of police officers, maybe not the absolute worst, but the kind of that level of corrupt officers. So we see the same things within housing teams, and it shouldn't surprise us. It's not one or two bad apples. It's the whole system's just kind of not working.
So I'm going to ask you this question before we carry on about how we can end homelessness. Somebody like me, actually, I had Shannon on, you might remember, who works with Shannon and might do this HPB. What's it again?
Homelessness best practice, yeah.
Homeless best practice.
HBC.
HPP. On that Thursday, it's a very interesting thing on YouTube. I'll look up there in their website. I'll get Mike to send me a link and I'll put it in the description. And I mentioned Shannon, I brought Shannon to about temporary housing because where I was, my nickname was the tip. And she said you could complain. I was even told by the worker at Crisis, yeah, you can complain, but you could be moved anywhere. Well, I didn't want to move anywhere. So moved anywhere in London, which is another thing to talk about one day, local connection, which in London, I've been stupid. So should there be some place, I'm not saying in the council, that people know they can go to? I wouldn't know where to go. And so I asked you or Shannon.
Yeah.
There should be
so you have services around, but it's for kind of like postcode lottery. So you've got CAB. Some CABs have got housing specialists, they're great. Same, some shelter kind of has a presence in certain places. But that isn't, that again, what I find is that it's not only very inconsistent, but it's also often when they're often be funded by the council. So that, like, if they help you at all, it would be very limited. And if you get a solicitor, solicitors will be great at getting you certain things. So they'll be great at getting you housed, but then they won't be able to they don't get paid for making a complaint and getting you compensation. So you kind of, I think certainly the kind of work I do now is kind of, linking people up with the solicitors and stuff like that, just to kind of actually get that kind of very, kind of broad approach in terms of getting people compensation, also getting them housed and that sort of thing. And also then raising it politically in that local area, because, you asked before about, does there need to be a rough sleeping commissioner? Well, no, I don't think so, because I think the system that's already in place is almost fine. There's one or two things you maybe improve with it, but it's mostly fine. The issue is that professionals in the sector just don't use it. They don't understand that homelessness is a legal issue. they shrug when they, when the council breaks the law. I remember one of the more recent complaints I got upheld for someone, and when I spoke to their, I won't say, so they're kind of a well-known organisation, well-known type of worker. And I said, why haven't you gone to the council and complained about this already? This is outrageous. This is terrible. This person's been left homeless for 2 years. And she just kind of shrugged and said, well, that's what the council does. And it's like, and then when it got complained, got the individual compensation, the council then committed to meeting the kind of a relevant set of standards in the sector to kind of improve their practice. And that was with about 20 or 30 hours work. And but it's basically workers across the sector are also terrified of councils. They also don't realise they have agency and they could actually do something about it. And I think that's why a lot of them get burnt out. I've been going like 20 years, and I say it's been pretty intense, but I haven't burnt out yet. And I think it's partly because when I see a problem, I'm not kind of limited in what I can then do to try and solve it. So it'll often involve complaining to the chief exec of the council. It'll often involve really annoying some people who are kind of in charge of these very, very bad services. And I think that's kind of something which I think a lot of workers end up leaving the sector. They're kind of disillusioned because they're like, well, it's all kind of corrupt. It doesn't work, and they just kind of fizzle out really. So I think, so I deliver training around the country, and one of the most frustrating things for me is, the people finish the training day that, they're kind of really excited because they found out that there's all this law around it can be used, and then Monday morning they'll kind of go and try and use the stuff, and their boss will come back to them and say, look, you can't challenge a council about that thing there, and they basically just give up. And it's a shame, but for me, like, people deserve better. They deserve to have professionals who are willing to actually go and kind of do what's necessary to get their rights kind of followed. I mean, none of this is like, is 99% of what I do is just focusing on what their rights are. It's nothing. It's not kind of extra to that. It's not like expecting them to be treated kind of better. It's just about that bare minimum. How being housed when they should be housed, being given minimum quality, minimum standard housing in terms of like meeting the actual suitability requirements of housing, location, all the rest of it. But yeah, I think the problem is that homeless people don't realise they've got these rights. The charity sector often either doesn't understand these rights exist, or they won't challenge the council when they basically don't kind of follow the law. And you have these kind of charities being funded by councils, and effectively what's happening is the council funds them to kind of do a particular bit of work, like roughly outreach or something like that. And this kind of for this amount, this £1 million, we'll expect X, Y, Z from you. But in that deal, there's like an implicit requirement that the charity won't kind of won't fight for their or won't defend their clients' rights, and so they effectively just give over their clients' rights in as part of that deal for X £1 million. And I think that is why I have so little time for the majority of the charity sector, is that they basically sold out. They're part of this system now, which for however many years has been promising to end rough sleeping, but it hasn't really done anything about that other than the Everyone In initiative, which kind of again showed that actually if you just house people, it actually works.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, we were part on that panel when at Expert Link about that. But there is something I'll put to you, and that's a theory. I have theories about everything. And it's reminding that because that social was the second worst social worker I was assigned. The first one, funny enough, when I was in hospital, she was supposed to tell me I was moving out of hospital, never did. But she did visit me. And she said, I'm leaving next week. I said, why? I said, I can't afford my electric bill. Now, social workers don't get pennies. I think, I'm going to put this to you, Mike, and you tell me what your opinion is I don't think these people are trained enough in the areas they're working in. Because you need specialisation, housing. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, they're certainly not. But again, they have agency. So I think so one of our kind of if you're looking at kind of making the council kind of behave better over a long period of time rather than just kind of we don't just complain. We'll kind of, I remember one case I worked on was a guy who had very serious osteoarthritis and PTSD, very clearly had a disability by the legal definition, and the council's template letter basically said, we've carefully considered your circumstances and concluded that you don't have a disability, and that then kind of had a knock-on effect to him not being housed. So I then took, I literally took that paragraph that they'd written, sent it to the housing committee and said, this is what your officers are doing. Do you want to do anything about that? And they then got Doughty Street Chambers, which is probably, well, one of the two best. I don't say that it's the best because I might offend Garden Court Chambers, but they're one of the two best barrister firms, if that's the right word for them, in the country to come in and do a Quality Act training with the housing team. The whole housing team had to do it. And there's a lot of other situations we've kind of done a similar kind of thing with that. So yeah, they don't get enough training for sure. That's almost deliberate sometimes, where actually, the seniors don't want the frontline workers to know what the law is because it's very onerous. That's the way it's always been. But the problem again is that housing officers they lack any curiosity. So they kind of get into this bureaucratic. As I say, I think the post office inquiry is illuminating when it comes to the actual investigation team, because they lose sight of what they're actually there for. They just kind of see their job as finding people guilty, and then they end up doing some very dodgy things to get that outcome. Same thing would go for something like intentional homelessness. So they almost see their job as to try and find people intentionally homeless, and they'll, in some cases very clearly make evidence up. Other cases, you'll see their biases throughout their decision making. But they could, they are agents. They have agency. They could just say to their boss, "I don't know this stuff. I need to go on some training." And there's loads of free, stuff out there. Shelter do free training for professionals in that sector. So there's a lot of training out there that would be available, but officers effectively kind of end up in this point where they don't want it. And related sectors like social work. I mean, University of Bedfordshire is kind of like, just down the road from me, and they have a very kind of big focus on social work. There is absolutely nothing at all about housing law within that whole course, which is insane because they work with lots of people who are homeless and lots of people who are not only homeless, but who would be owed a duty by the housing authority in the area, and therefore would actually make their jobs much easier. So, if you've got because what happens, you've got a family, the family of kids, the housing team will say they're intentionally homeless when they probably aren't. That then gets referred to children's services to have to then house that family. But actually, if the children's social workers simply just looked at the decision and said, this is nonsense, we're going to challenge it, this, Section 184 decision, which is kind of the main decision letter, then 9 times out of 10, they would actually get the housing team to actually pick up that duty. So it helped the social workers out immeasurably. But again, no curiosity, really. I say no curiosity. There is some curiosity because I've trained social workers who are great, but I think in the sector, there's that sort of, I don't want to get too into kind of like big picture stuff, but one of the problems with the public sector is that people lose sight of their organisation's aims. They kind of, they say, well, organisation is this big thing, and I've just got this little job here to kind of do. There's that old joke, I'm going to tell it, I'm sorry. So the two council workers just, working down the road, orange suit, cones out on the road, doing this roadwork stuff. One of them is using all these fancy tools to dig a hole, and then when they've done it, they can move on and dig another hole, and another one comes in behind them and fills the hole in. And some little kids watching them, what they're doing, very excited by all the tools. And says to me, what are you doing here? What's you look like you're doing some really good stuff. And they say, oh yeah, no, we're the guy who plants the trees, he's off work today, so we're just kind of doing our bits, and like the actual important bit of planting the tree has not been done. So that's what a lot of homeless services end up doing, because they do all these other things. Psychologically informed environments are great, but if you're not getting a roof over your, suitable home over that person's head, that seems to me to be very limited. You can try and deliver really good therapy to someone on the streets. I think they'd probably rather be housed, and you can still, you can still go and support people. It's not that you can't, it's not that people are magically fixed once they get housed, but they've got one less big issue to have to worry about. And most people actually don't want the help, in my experience. They just want to have their own front door for it to be suitable and just be left alone, basically. And they don't want lots of different professionals coming. You mentioned your social worker moving on. That's one of, and turnover is one of the big problems with professionals. Is you get to know one professional, then they leave or they get reassigned or whatever. That's no good for anyone. We know it's no good for anyone, and yet that's how services end up working. So it's not even that we're, even if charities were right and that these people need support, even if that was true, and I think it's very questionable. I think they need community, and I think there is specialist services which can help. But more than anything, they just, I don't know, they need their own agency. They need to be kind of left alone and have some sort of control over things. And that's the thing they lose when they enter into this system, is they just basically, even like to the point where, you have no control over where you live. You mentioned about you might be moved anywhere. yeah, there are people in London getting placed up in Durham. You know,
Yeah.
it's crazy that that's acceptable. That was Localism Act 2011 that did that. So that was Eric Pickles, and we're still seeing the damage that does. And we know it again. We know it damages people. We know, there's plenty of studies which show if you basically pick someone up from their support network and just dump them 200 miles away, the outcomes for that family in 10 or 20 years time is going to be very, very, very affected by that kind of practice. And yet housing officers sign those letters that say, yeah, we think it's suitable for you to be 200 miles away. And often they get, when it actually goes to court, they'll lose because they haven't actually done what they should do. So yeah, I've given you a fun example, and so I'm just rattling on. But
No,
so
no,
delivering
I'll
training.
just say to you about two things. Okay, I was introduced to the homeless worker by that social worker earlier on. Right, when an actual crisis stepped in for me, that's how I got help. Because I don't think you can advocate for yourself. It becomes, and what they heard, well, they got in touch with the head person in the borough, but the homeless worker didn't know about that. I'd left the place. She hadn't been told by the social worker, and she was leaving. But I remember you talk about anywhere in the country. I was in St Albans with cardboard citizens. I've told this story a few times. Other thing, cardboard citizens. I went there the Thursday to meet the people who we knew the project with, the homeless people, and they took me the last day just to talk to people because that's what I do. And I ended up talking to the head of housing in St Albans. And we had to talk about this very thing about people coming out. And he said he was at a meeting in Luton of all the housing. And then he said, oh, Hackney Council are moving people to Luton now. And that's close, really, compared to some of the places they've moved into.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
most councils have to have a policy about how. So Lambeth Council, there was a big case a couple of years ago with Lambeth where they housed someone in Gravesend, a family in Gravesend. They lost the case because their own policy said that people couldn't be housed more than 45 minutes away from their, or half an hour away from their border, like their parish boundary. And Gravesend was like 2 hours away or something. So there's a whole kind of range of things that could be done to challenge those kinds of decisions. But again, the sector is either ignorant, willfully ignorant, I'd say, or they're just apathetic or whatever. They just don't think that they can do anything about it. And so you have to, so Luton's a good example. So Luton, because its reputation precedes it, it's cheaper to house people in Luton than it is somewhere like St Albans. I imagine the difference is quite.
St Albans is expensive. I know. I looked
around.
Yeah.
So even though they're only about probably 5 or 8 miles apart or whatever. So that means that a lot of London councils they'll see that it's cheaper to house people in Luton, and it's still kind of travelling distance of North London. But so that then causes massive issues for Luton Borough Council, because then suddenly they have their own homeless people they have to house, and all the accommodation is then taken up by London councils basically, and that's allowed to go on. Central government have basically allowed that to happen. So central that's definitely a central government kind of fault that would be their issue. But you then have kind of very live issue for us in Bedford is. So Luton, one of the things they did was to say, well, okay, we're going to buy a massive block of flats in Bedford. Many of those people then evicted, and they're going to house people from Luton into Bedford. Bedford, I don't know the full information yet. Bedford appear to have then bought a hotel back in Luton as a kind of like warfare almost of retaliatory action, and now houses people from Bedford down in Luton. So it's this system where no one's really kind of keeping an eye on it. We're yet to see whether Labour really kind of get a handle on all this stuff, but no one seems to be driving it really. No one's in control of it, and the frontline workers don't make enough noise about it. And they basically, when their boss tells them to shut up, they shut up, and that's for me is just not it's just not forgivable at the moment. What's happening? Because oh, sorry, you're going
back to what we were going to talk about, ending homelessness.
Yeah. Sorry,
No. Look, all these things tie into it, don't they?
Yeah. It's most of it is stuff which is well within the bounds of kind of human power to do something about. Rough sleeping being one of them. As I say, I went going back to those initial stats. And there's a video, I think the video you saw was the one on YouTube where that was the title of the video,
Hmm.
how to actually end homelessness. But yeah, that kind of, if you're working in an area you're concerned about rough sleeping numbers, just focus on getting the council to follow the law. Um, and that is initially going to involve fighting gatekeeping. So you're going to get a lot of gatekeeping going on. And then once you win that battle, you'll have to take on the council when it comes to making perverse non-priority decisions, because by definition, almost the majority of people who sleep rough will be in priority needs because they have, kind of additional needs. They have, they do have mental health issues. They do have trauma. They do have lots of other things going on, which would tie in directly to the law about vulnerability. So, yeah, so that's that. So that those are a few things. I mean, it takes a couple of years. So in Bedford, it took us 2 years, 2.5 years of fighting before the council would even ignore. Up until then, they literally said, you guys are troublemakers. You kind of call it, what you're doing, that sort of thing. You're not kind of working in partnership with our agency and stuff like that, which we weren't, because I had no respect for the agencies at the time in the town. But yeah, but after a couple of years of being just consistent, learning as on the go, because we knew nothing about this when we started off really. But by just doing that consistently over a period of time and getting those upheld complaints, getting the LGO involved, getting people compensation, getting decisions overturned, we had about maybe 20 or 30 cases overturned before the council started to budge.
That is
Um, you
quite
know,
long.
and
Yeah.
yeah, well, again, it was, yeah. I mean, again, it was in our part time, and I think, well, spare time really. We don't get paid for it at all, really. So yeah, it kind of it takes a couple of years. But as I say, since then, since 2013, when we got our first upheld complaint, or beginning of 2014, number of single people in TA in Bedford's gone up from about 15 to about, I don't know, something like 450, 500. I can't remember the exact numbers. So those are people who are now on track to get housed properly.
Sorry, Mike. I've got to ask you this question after my experience of it. And actually, I've got another
Yeah,
one.
yeah,
Well, an ex-friend now. But he contacted me about his friend's daughter was evicted. She has a family of children. They were put in this temporary accommodation. She actually said in that temporary close, the window was hanging by a piece of string. They
yeah,
was be cleaned before. In the end, she actually moved out.
yeah,
I don't know how she did. Now she's living in Tilbury for some
yeah,
reason. She was living in somewhere in Essex near Rayleigh at the time, which is near
yeah.
Southend.
But again, quality of TA is all within the council's power to do something about. You just need to shout about it. So I
Mm.
remember, so back in 2013 and 2014 when we started, Bedford Borough Council did not. There was no beds in TA. There was nothing. It was literally just four walls and a roof. That was it. And I met one of the first clients I had was a lady who was, I don't know, nearly giving birth. Basically, she was heavily pregnant, and I went to visit her in the TA to kind of do the assessment forms and whatever. And she was sleeping on the kitchen worktop because it was the warmest place in the house. And so we rate, again, legally speaking, the council did not have to provide beds in that TA. Legally, it wasn't a legal issue, but we complained about it. We raised it in the housing committee and so on, and they basically changed their policy and said, okay, all temporary accommodation will now have beds. Um, so since again, in the last couple of years, Bedford Borough Council has earmarked something like 25 million to buy their own stock, buy their own TA, and it's decent quality. It's new, but it's beautiful, some of it. So it's kind of, again, it's that thing of like, it's not okay that councils kind of provide shoddy slum kind of conditions for people in TA. That shouldn't happen. And again, professionals in the sector can do something about it if only they bother to do it. So and you can do. I mean, I tell this story quite a lot, so it made me laugh basically. But I remember working with a single mum with like a 2-year-old. She got moved into being into like some sort of temporary accommodation unit by Bedford Borough Council. Hadn't been cleaned since the last person was in there. She rang up the council, said, this is disgusting here, there's piss everywhere and all the rest of it. And they ignored her. So she took a video of it. She got a phone out, just walked around the house, showing the footage of kind of all the different issues, kind of just kind of damp and all sorts of things. She put it up on YouTube. She sent the YouTube video to the council and said, if you don't fix this situation right now, I'm going to put this in the We Are Bedford Facebook group tomorrow. They immediately got placed in a hotel there for 2 days while a deep clean was undertaken. And they moved back into the property and it was okay. So that's just one of 100 different ways that you could deal with it.
I've done
Again, it's
something
this.
similar,
Sorry, and you say again.
I've done something similar when somebody died where I was living. They the family came in, cleared it up. There were 15 sacks of rubbish in the drive. couldn't fit in the dustbin. The dustman were refusing to take it. So I phoned my landlord and I said, "You've got to remove this health and safety." A week later, it was still there. So I took a time-stamped photograph. I emailed and said, "If this is not cleared by Friday, I'm going to send it to the council." Next
Yeah.
minute, it was gone.
Yeah, I mean, it's the bottom line is it's just that understanding that it's not, this isn't just the way it is. It's that there are things you can do about it. No, I mean, I've never been in a situation where I can't do anything about it. I'm working on a case similar at the moment. If you look on the YouTube channel, there's a lady called Leonie that I did a video with, where exactly that. You know, she's basically been in horrendous conditions. The most recent TA unit she's in, when it rains, it just, you know, water just floods down the walls. There's clearly some nonsense going on with the landlord. But we just, every time something doesn't work, we just think of something else to do and escalate it. So yeah, so we, you know, we're just going to make a formal complaint about certain aspects which we hadn't complained about before. We're involving all the politicians. We've done that video, sent it to the housing committee councillors, and said, you know, what is this okay? Is this what Bedford Borough is all about? You know, is this what, if this is this acceptable? And at some point it will work, you know. So, but I think the key thing is we're not going to stop doing stuff until we. I mean, there's a few other things up our sleeve we can still pull, some other levers we can pull before we kind of give up, which I think will work at some point. But it's that again, it's that, you know, that's, I would say that's our job. Yeah, if you work in a section, you get paid to house people, then this is what you
Okay,
do.
okay. We're coming towards the end. I'm going to give you a chance now, Mike. I'm going to give you a magic wand. How do you end up homelessness in the country?
House building, simple as. But one of the ways you get there is you basically, you know, you can either wait for the government to build enough houses, which probably won't happen, or you let's say you multiply the compensation that the LGO recommends by 10 or 20, you know, times. So there actually going to be tens of thousands of pounds worth of compensation going out there, and you advertise that service, so you make people aware that that exists. Then what happens is councils are no longer just able to get away with breaking the law, and they then start actually kind of, you know, working out what on earth it is they're doing. If every council in the country did what Bedford's done, you're going to find that homelessness goes down drastically. But it's because, you know, because most councils just get away with murder pretty much, not literal murder, but you know what I mean. So that they get away with just wholesale breaking the law to the point where they just don't care. They're just like, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, there's just, so what if we break the law? But if that actually changed, then housing officers would then have to face what they're doing every day, because they get away with it by compartmentalizing their life. So they kind of, you know, they don't think what they're doing is illegal, even though it clearly is. They know it is deep down. But if you kind of have that chain of events, then you have housing officers actually standing up to their bosses and saying, we're not going to do this anymore. That gets natural, you know, that'll get national press. That's when the central government have to start grappling with the issue, and local governments have to start grappling with the issue as well. That's what I'd say. That's what I would do. That seems to be, just increase the penalty for breaking the law.
Okay, we'll get some heavy guys out and beat them up. But, okay, a point I want to ask you early on, this is the final question, is do you think that charities who are funded by councils are scared to stand up to councils?
100, yeah, there's no doubt, absolutely no doubt. Yeah, I mean, it's inexcusable, and explicit, and everyone knows about it, you know. So we'd have clients come to us where the worker from the, you know, the local government funded service would say, we can't touch this one. It's, you know, we can't complain to the council. Can you do it? And yeah, so we'd have to kind of take on their work. They get paid for it still. They get paid for the good outcome, but it would be us that got that good outcome for them. So yeah, 100%. There's absolutely no doubt about it. It's a scandal in that sense, that charities sell the rights of their clients off in exchange for funding contracts where they won't make sure the council follows the law and actually their client gets housed. So it's, you know, maybe one day there'll be a post office inquiry type thing going on in the homelessness sector, and the bigwigs in the charity sector will have to answer for why they didn't do anything. You know, you knew gatekeeping was happening. What did you do about it? And I think most chief execs would look pretty foolish at that point.
But as you know, I'm into theatre, so I'll just leave this to the final thought. Is the only reason Alan Bates came to notice is because of the television program. There had been a documentary, actually, I found it after that in 2015. It actually states the case and nothing's been done. So maybe I'll write a play about it, you know,
Yeah,
called,
very, very seriously, I think that might do a lot of good.
yeah.
because it's got a cat, so another thing my final thought, Ian, is another thing charities do is because they perpetuate this myth that these people are useless and they need our support, we need your money at Christmas, that sort of thing. They're basically perpetuating the idea to the public that homeless people deserve to be homeless and can't be housed. No, neither of those things are true, but it's the charity sector that benefits from those myths being out there. And again, that's why I get angry at charities, because they are the ones who control public perception, and they make out like people, they're feckless and they're lazy, and they've got themselves into this mess, and they need us to come in and rescue them. That's just not true. It's just the system doesn't work.
I'll say something about what you just said. The one thing that annoys me as an ex-rough sleeper is I always see these charities. I include Christ in this. Okay, the picture of Christmas is some bloke sitting on a doorstep or sleeping, on a doorstep, with a blanket over him. Most of my sleeping bag, so that's not factual, but that's a nice image. And I always think to myself, why don't they show a picture of a guy? And I know I'll use the example who can play the guitar brilliantly. Or I was a comedian, so can make jokes. Because most homeless people are, you probably agree, are quite amusing. Well, I am anyway. Anyway, thank you, Mike.
That's all right, and I appreciate asking the questions. It's cool. Thank you.
Yeah, you will come back sometime again in the future. Maybe I'll make a housing minister when I become prime minister. That is
cool.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that is the guest show. This week we had the amazing Mike Hyden. I will get him to send me a link to his YouTube channel. I don't call it a podcast. Same thing. I'm trying to get on YouTube. Well, I'm too good looking. Very knowledgeable person. I'll also get a link to his website. I think I did have it last time. I'll get it again. And what we do here, we don't shout. It's like me and Mike had a nice discussion about this to highlight these things that need to be highlighted. And that's the thing, what I try to do here. I try to highlight things. I've been asked in some places, will I go off and somebody asked me to do a whole series of program at HS2. It is a terrible thing, HS2. I won't do it. I might do a program about it. But that's it. So if you found this interesting, please share. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is maybe you want to make a comment on one, Mike, or maybe you'd like me to connect you with Mike, or you just want to comment on the podcast in general, or maybe you want to come on and talk about something. Or finally, I'm going to encourage you to join my mailing list. It's not, I always say join the mailing list, but the mailing list, what happens is you'll always get notifications of each broadcast 24 hours before. I'll do a monthly newsletter, which is going to come out this Friday, so I've got to start writing that. And I always put something more than what the general public see in the emails to people. Say what's happening. I might ask for help. I need a lot of help, some people say. So thank you very much, and I wish you all a pleasant week.
Cool, thanks, Ian.
Thanks, Mike. I enjoyed that. That was interesting. Shocked that you're Bedford, you've got it down at almost zero. But
people with recourse, I mean, there's still maybe 8 or so people without recourse.
Well, you might when Matt Downey came to the meeting of that, but he was saying in Scotland they've done it. No priority, he said at the time. But I still, actually, I met somebody. I went to the museum about 3 weeks ago to see Nicola and to arrange when they were coming on. And as I walked in, I heard this voice shout, Mr. Cowman, Mr. Cowman. Not many people know me refer to me by my surname or know myself. It was a bloke I met the first day I went to Lincoln's Inn, 2006. That first year, he went in and out of places. And, he had a nickname. He liked his tipple. Nice guy. But he said to me, the museum provide bond. for people who are getting accommodation. He said, "Like, go for it." I said, you've been in and out of places more times than I've got dinner. What are you going to do?" And then he said to me, "Yeah, a couple of years ago, I was in Edinburgh for a year and a half. Bills got too much for me." And I think that's something I'd like to somehow address with somebody on this program about the problem is, because think about it, I don't know about you, I wasn't trained about bills when I left school. I wasn't trained about politics. And that's
Yeah,
years ago, I hated politics. Now I'm into it because I've got to deal with it. But it's the education and preparing for this sort of thing. How do
yeah,
you, like, you're an advocate. Not everybody can advocate. And normally they go around smashing a bottle of whiskey over their head. I'll use that example. And that's how they're going to scream because that's how they're going to get things. Normally by screaming, you don't get anything. So there's the area. Anyway, thanks, mate.
that's all right, mate. I'll speak soon, Ian. Yeah, take
Okay.
it easy.
Yeah.
Have
Can
a good evening. Yeah.
you email me the link for the YouTube channel and your website?
So don't worry, the website's shit. So just do the. I've sent the YouTube link already. So just
Okay.
look at that basically. Yeah, the website's got nothing on it really.
Yeah,
So
I've got actually Nicholas' son's going to build me a base. I can build a website. I haven't got the time. And also,
yeah,
when I learned website building was about 15 years ago. Lots of things have changed. Um, but anyway, I'll see you around, mate.
yeah, cool, nice one. Take it easy, Ian. Yeah,
Bye.
bye bye.
Well, wasn't that interesting? And there he goes, flying off into the sky to solve another housing problem. He's so quick, that guy. But I always find when I talk to Mike, fascinating. He talks about so many things, so many factors, and that's the reality of the world, ladies and gentlemen. Any issue you deal with, there's not just one factor. So maybe you found that interesting. Maybe you'd like to know what else I've got in store. If you're on the mailing list, you would know about it because usually I put little things on with the emails, and I send out a newsletter every month which says more. I don't put it on public. A good example is, and I had to share it the other day because of shoddy reporting, which is an issue I seem to have at the moment with newspapers publishing false articles. But example is, the Mayor of London said he would end street homelessness by 2030. Well, I thought that'd be a good thing to talk about in my news review. Last Tuesday I sent an email to the press office, and the way you deal with press offices, you give them a deadline date that you need the information by. So I asked it by 5 p.m. on Thursday. And I got a reply, which I was surprised about, just saying, "Don't worry, I'll pass it on to somebody, you'll get a reply." What happens? You guessed it. No reply. And I must admit, I was editing the Friday's piece, but I got rather pissed off. Annoyed. Not that our self-importance, just like this is the process. I've only had one other department. Actually, it's the same department. No, it's the government department that are bad. Their press office is bad, and I had to make a complaint about it. So I said, yeah, I showed the copy. I forwarded the copy of the email back to them that I received. 20 minutes later, I got a reply. I was shocked. This is 7 o'clock at night. Well, yeah. But the answer was a no answer. It was rubbish. It's one of those little things. As she said, "Oh, we're in hands with the government about building homes." I didn't ask that. I said, "What are you going to do?" And I actually stated it. Next minute, I got the truth, which I suspected that they're going to be looking into. They're now still in the planning stages she did put, and I'm going to say I doubt this is true. I'm now on the list to hear about any rough sleeping in London. Now, if I do hear, it'd be nice, but I will be looking at it. That to me is, I was doing what a journalist should do. Look for the truth. Don't be fobbed off, because press officers are, I think some of them are very brilliant. I will admit, I've had some great ones with the DWP about benefits and actually I once sent an email to the DWP asking them how they work out inflation rates. Very simple. They passed me to the Treasury press office, who then dealt with me just as quick and explained it. And I think that's what I should do. Anyway, if you are interested, or you want to make a comment, or you'd like to be on my guest show, just email me at Ian Kalman, that's India Alpha November, Kilo Alpha Lima, Mike Alpha November, at GMX, that's the initials, GeorgeMichaelX-Ray.com. Also, you'll see down below a couple of other links. One is for a petition I created, which is my effort. It's, let's get any empty building that's empty for more than 6 months, let it occupied and change into residential. The amount of empty buildings in this country is astounding. They're just decaying away, and it's usually because some bloke wants to make some money out of it. Well, let's stop that. The other thing is, and this is the hard one, is, well, I fund this podcast out of my pocket. And example, this month, I'm really looking at, my God, it's going to be a struggle this month. Because of all the bills. But like you, I have bills. Plus I have the bills for the podcast. And I want to expand the podcast, but I can't expand it with nothing. It says, buy a cup of coffee. Please consider and support it. If you think I'm doing a good job, if you think I'm not, then tell me, please. Anyway, have a nice week. Bye.